Hey, what's up everyone? Kokomojo here, and I've got a banger of a video to share with you today. I'm really excited for this one. This is the 925 Sub-Rogue Guide, and I'm super excited to talk to you about all the different things that Sub-Rogue can do in Mythic Plus. And I myself have been playing Sub-Rogue for all of Season 3, and I've gotten up to keys at like the 24 or 25 level. But to get a high-level player's perspective on Sub-Rogue, I ended up hopping onto a call with JPC, the man himself.
My name is JPC. I go by James, though, for those of you that know me. And I play World of Warcraft. I'm main rogue, and I play in the guild Liquid. And I do a lot of M+. My M+ team's called Ambition. And I play a lot of M+.
In this guide, JPC and I will share insights about builds, rotation, and how to use your utility to maximize your impact in your Mythic Plus runs. First off, let's talk about why you might want to play Rogue.
Rogue compared to other DPS, Rogue has so much like in its toolkit to be able to make sure that the team succeeds. And like I would even go as far as saying that if I or any of the top rogues, right? If you look at like, I don't know, Yellow or Ram or any of these guys, and we joined a plus 20 key, I would almost say that there's a 0% chance that we would fail the key, just because we could literally do, you can do everything as a rogue. To like a perfect example is like in Gambit, right? You can stop every crime alert, you can kick on cooldown, you can stop every fish stick multiple times. You can stop every fish stick, even if there's two fish sticks in the same pack. You can do crazy prio damage to make sure that your team always gets the relic that they want. You can AoE if the priority for safety is on AoE. You can pure funnel if there's a really important mob that you need to kill. Like, it's crazy how much you can do on Rogue. You can soothe stuff. You can fix mob patrols. Like, if you see that, you know, for example, a mask in DOS is about to walk into your tank, and your tank is like completely oblivious because why would he be looking around with his camera? You can just distract the mob, and you basically save the team, right? And you do that in a bunch of different dungeons. I think playing Rogue gives you a really unique perspective on the impact that you can have in a key compared to people that play other DPS. And then if you ever do choose to play a different DPS besides Rogue, and you carry that mindset with you, you're going to be like the most impactful version of that other class that a lot of people have like ever played with, right? And I think that's like a really unique thing about Rogue. The lens in which you see M+ is like a lot different than the way most DPS probably see M+.
Keeping these ideas in mind, let's get started. We'll review talents, how to approach different damage scenarios, and how to think about your utility and more. If you enjoy the guide, please consider subscribing and liking the video. It helps me out and lets me know you're enjoying the content. Also, I want to give a huge thanks to JPC for taking the time to talk about Rogue and help with this guide. This would not have been possible without him. For high-level Rogue and multi-class DPS gameplay, check him out on twitch.tv/JPCtheman_. Let's jump right in. For talents, there's really one build that the top players use and is great for all levels of play. The level 15 talent we're taking is Weapon Master. This gives us extra shadow strikes and interacts with both the 2 and 4 set tier bonuses. For our level 25 talent, we are almost exclusively playing Shadow Focus. This makes our abilities more efficient when we're in Shadow Dance and lets us spend less time waiting for enough energy to enter Shadow Dance. There are some situations where Night Stalker is a viable choice in this row, namely dungeons with lots of big pulls like Halls of Atonement or The Other Side. However, the single target damage with Night Stalker is lower, and the rotation is more clunky, so just stick with Shadow Focus unless you want to experiment in these higher target count dungeons. Our level 30 row is Deeper Stratagem, which lets us build up to 6 combo points instead of 5. This makes our finisher stronger and will be the default pick for Mythic Plus. Level 35 row is where we get Cheat Death. This is one of the strongest defensive talents in the game, and no other talent is really worth considering most of the time. This talent can help your team recover from mistakes, or you can use it intentionally to get uptime on final bosses with lethal mechanics when your timer is tight. All choices in the level 40 row are viable. I default to Prey on the Weak since it helps the team's damage to targets that you're stunning, but Night Terrors is great for groups with no slow, or on Spiteful Weak when you'll need constant slowing to help kite the shades. Level 45 Row is Enveloping Shadows, which gives us a second dance charge and even more cooldown reduction when we spend combo points. This is going to enable us to use Shadow Dance more often and situationally send back-to-back Shadow Dances. The level 50 row gives us a choice between Shuriken, Tornado, and Master of Shadows. Tornado is best in Mythic Plus to give us a short burst of AoE damage and to help us maximize our flagellation damage, which we'll talk about a little later. Master of Shadows is also viable, specifically with the Night Stalker build, and it's better on single target than Tornado, but generally we should stick to using Tornado in keys. Venthyr is the Covenant of choice for sub in Mythic Plus. The rogue Covenant ability is Flagellation, often called Flag, and this gives us solid funnel damage and a big versatility and haste buff. Our Covenant legendary, Obedience, gives us huge cooldown reduction when we deal damage with Flag, which will bring our Flag CD down to around 1 minute on single target and around 30 or 40 seconds in AoE. For our second legendary, we will be running Finality. This gives us a flat damage buff to our finishers, and there's not really much you need to do to play around this legendary, just enjoy the passive DPS increase. The Atar is our Soulbind of choice. Soothing Shade gives us a big mastery buff, which is welcome since it makes our finisher stronger. Life is But an Appetizer gives us a big speed and avoidance buff when we have any food buff, which is basically all of the time in keys. Party Favors gives us a flat random stat buff. Verse and Crit are best for us, but all stats are helpful, so just make sure you always have this up. When it comes to stats, generally your goal should be to improve your item level, since this will grant the most agility. Once you have multiple items for a slot that are around the same item level, then you can start making secondary stat choices.
Most of the time, it's not until quite a ways into the patch when you even really have the ability to switch a bunch of pieces around, because for the most part at the beginning of a patch, most of the upgrades that you get, you're going to want to use no matter what, just because it's higher item level. So even if I had bad stats for Sub-Rogue, for example, and M+, if it's 20 item levels higher, it doesn't really matter that they're bad stats, right? So it's sort of a bit later into each patch where you really get the opportunity to mix and match stuff.
For secondary stats, Verse and Crit are our best secondaries for Mythic Plus. They give us improved single target, AoE, and funnel damage, and versatility is especially helpful since it also gives us passive damage reduction. Mastery is a good stat as well, especially for AoE or funnel. It buffs our finisher damage, and in AoE, every other global will be a finisher, so we get a lot of value there. Haste should generally be avoided since it only marginally helps our single target damage, and AoE is very important in Mythic Plus. For trinkets, Cache of Acquired Treasures is insanely good. This should not be understated. You should try to get this at any item level. Pugging normal or heroic, raid is totally viable. This trinket is a massive DPS gain in AoE.
Cache, which is the trinket from Zymox, this thing obviously does way more damage than any other trinket, right? But the Sims don't necessarily reflect that.
Earthbreakers and Chain are other great trinkets from the raid. Both are a little clunky to use, but if you can make them work, then they can deal a lot of damage. From Mythic Plus, File, Shadowgrasp Totem, and Grim Codex are solid choices. Try to farm one or two of these if you don't have access to any trinkets from the raid. When making gearing choices, your best bet is to simulate your character. You can do this on raid bots or by downloading the Simulation Craft desktop client. Use Top Gear to simulate items in your bag to make these choices.
For the most part, I just sim my gear, and the one thing I do though, really as it pertains to high keys, is sometimes I will go in favor of something that sims slightly less for more durability, more survivability. So for example, I pretty much only Sims really like Mastery, and they like it for M+ anyways, for Sub-Rogue, and they like Crit as well. But I will pretty much play exclusively Crit Verse on as many pieces as I possibly can and try and get my versatility as high as humanly possible, because that extra little bit can really help in high keys. So, even though sometimes The Sims says oh, you could be doing 100 more DPS, it's okay, well, if I was dead, then I don't know if I'd be doing the extra 100 DPS. So yeah, that's the one place where I deviate from Sims.
The general principle for the Sub-Rogue rotation is to build and spend as many combo points as possible, while stacking cooldowns to maximize their effects. We build combo points with abilities like Shadow Strike, Shuriken Storm, and Backstab, then spend combo points with finisher abilities like Eviscerate and Slice and Dice. At any given time, we want to build combo points with the most efficient abilities we can, and this will depend on what cooldowns we have active and how many targets we're fighting, as we'll see soon. For finisher abilities, we should always cast those with at least 5 combo points when talented into Deeper Stratagem, or 4 without that talent. This is because our finishers scale linearly with the number of combo points spent, so casting them at high combo points will maximize their effect while minimizing the time spent casting. As an example, compare these two cast sequences of Shadow Strike, Eviscerate versus Shadow Strike, Eviscerate, Shadow Strike, Eviscerate. Both deal the same total amount of damage, but one costs us an additional global cooldown, leading to lower DPS. Maximizing the impact of our damage cooldowns is one of the best ways to increase your DPS and speed up the dungeon. Symbols of Death is the clock of our rotation. We will synchronize our other cooldowns to Symbols of Death, and our goal is to cast this ability as many times as possible, only delaying it for specific reasons. We should try to cast this while at lower energy to not waste the energy that it grants us, then fit as many hard-hitting abilities into this window as possible. Shadow Dance enables us to use stealth abilities, namely Shadow Strike and Cheap Shot. We want to cast this at least once with every Symbols of Death, then fit as many Shadow Strikes in as possible. Dance lasts for 8 seconds, which means we can fit 8 abilities into each dance. Since Dance gives us access to Shadow Strike, we should try to cast as many Shadow Strikes as possible. This means we want to start Dance at low combo points, so we can immediately start casting Shadow Strikes. We'll go over the single target and AoE rotations in detail later in the video. We want to make sure we always have one charge of Dance available for symbols, but also make sure we never cap on charges. This means we will occasionally need to cast Dance without symbols to avoid capping on charges.
I'll see people sitting on 2 dance charges for like 4 finishers, which is like, you might think it's not a big deal, but I mean, you've technically just been doing less damage for the last like 8 globals or something. And if you have that happen multiple times in key, that definitely adds up.
Flagellation, or Flag, is our Venthyr Covenant ability. This is one of our best sources of single target and funnel damage. It also provides a strong stat boost to improve our AoE damage. We should press Flag when we have high combo points, then immediately use a finisher and enter Symbols of Death and Dance window to build and spend as many combo points as we can. In single target, you should be able to reliably get 27 stacks of Flag, and in AoE you can easily get the max of 30 stacks and continue casting finishers to get even more damage out of Flag. Shadow Blades is actually a fairly weak cooldown relative to the other 3-minute cooldowns in the game. You should cast this on cooldown, ideally stacking it with Symbols and Dance. It improves our single target damage, but doesn't do a ton for AoE. We also get a lot of passive Shadow Blades uptime due to our 2-piece tier bonus.
I pretty much always send it on CD unless I know that I am going into an important single target encounter, or just an important encounter in general, in a short amount of time. So, like a good example for this is like right before Hakar, you know, in Arden Wheel, or in the other side, there's that 4-pack, right, that you kill and then you go into the Hakar boss. Let's say you have like Shadow Blades come off cooldown when the mobs are half health, and then you're about to go into Hakar, which is like probably way more dangerous than that 4-pack, then that's like a good example of when you might choose to save Shadow Blades. Yeah, so situations like that, sometimes I will hold, but almost always the rest of the key I will pretty much just send it on cooldown.
Next up, let's talk about different damage scenarios with the different target counts. First, let's talk about our maintenance abilities. We want to maintain Slice and Dice 100% of the time on 5 or fewer targets. S&D increases our attack speed, which increases auto attack DPS and the rate of Shadow Techniques procs that grant energy and combo points. It can also be worth keeping S&D up all of the time on any target count to increase priority target damage. We also want to maintain Rupture on up to 3 targets, but this is a somewhat small DPS gain. You're better off prioritizing doing mechanics than maintaining Rupture, so maintain this whenever it's convenient. I've seen some things like, I'm guessing this is one of those like ideas that you found, like skipping applying Rupture in cases where it might be theoretically optimal, but maybe it's just like clunky. So like first boss of Theater of Pain, I've seen you like skip Rupture at the start, and then maybe Rupture once like some of the dangerous parts of the pull are over. Can you explain your thought process there?
Yeah, so like on Theater, for example, I mean, first off, you have like a finite amount of time on Zav before you potentially get sent down or have to lose uptime because of the slow from the banner and like having to move out for the circle on the boss, right? So you have a short amount of time to squeeze your damage in, which means you don't want the ramp for you to do damage to take too long, right? And then on top of that, a lot of the times the like highest priority is killing the relic, right? So if you look at that boss, for example, it takes about 10 seconds for your team to kill a relic in a high key, maybe 15, right? So especially if your other teammates are cleaving or no one's helping you make sure that it's the relic that gets killed. So you definitely don't want to rupture the relic. And if you rupture the boss and then switch to the relic, then you have the relic die slower, which it actually does a lot of damage in high keys. And on top of that, if you rupture the boss, well, you don't want to rupture in dance and symbols, which means you're delaying your dance and symbols a global or two. And then on top of that, if you open with a shadow strike on a boss, and then your next decision is to switch to a relic, but the relic doesn't have find weakness on it, then when you eviscerate the relic, you're going to do no damage. So like a lot of times, I like to open on the boss with a shadow strike, get my flag on it, and then Symbol's fan to make sure, or Symbol's Shuriken Storm, I guess it's called, to make sure that my find weakness is on the relic, and then that way when I eviscerate it, I don't lose out on the shadow damage. And then, like if you just, it ends up being like kind of like a, like it borderline doesn't matter, kind of, right? It just like complicates matters and it slows down like the important part of the encounter. And then like by the time you're all sorted and you've killed the relic and you've got all your damage out and stuff, then at that point, if it's like a suitable time to put up rupture or something, I'll look to do that then. But yeah, it's just kind of on a case by case basis, I guess.
That totally makes sense, because like Rupture does double the damage of an Eviscerate, but it has to be, active for the full duration. So you might as well, like, at the end of the day, you're gaining like 5,000 damage, right?
Yeah. It's something like, I remember if you never pressed Rupture a single time, right? And I remember this was from a patch or two ago, so I don't know how accurate it is anymore. But I asked the theory crafters to do just a fun sim for me. And essentially, if you never pressed Rupture once, ever, it was a 4% damage loss, which nowadays, let's say you do 15,000 DPS, this would be 600 DPS. So if you never press Rupture once, you lose 600 DPS. Well, if you press Rupture a ton of times, but you just choose not to press it one time in the opener, you might do 30 less DPS. So like, yeah, on a boss, instead of doing 20,000 DPS, I'm gonna do 19,970 DPS. Like,
Oh no.
I would much rather deal with the mechanics going on and make sure that I am doing my job as a rogue and M plus, than worry too much about the 30 DPS I'm missing out on.
Let's dive into the rotations for different scenarios. This scenario is the simplest rotation of all. We're going to press Symbols of Death and Dance together on cooldown, apply Flag to a high priority target while at high combo points, alternate between pressing Black Powder to spend combo points on AoE damage, and Shuriken Storm to build combo points. 4-piece tier procs from your AoE Black Powders will max out your combo points, so be ready to recast Black Powder again to not waste the combo points. Shuriken Tornado will line up with every other symbols. When Tornado is available, apply Flag to a high priority target while at low combo points, press Shuriken Tornado, then cast Symbols and Dance during the Tornado windup to refund the energy and get the damage buffs. Press Black Powder for the next 4 globals while Tornado casts the Shuriken Storms. The funnel rotation is identical to AoE, except that instead of pressing Black Powder to spend combo points, you'll press Eviscerate instead on a high priority or high HP mob. On any given pull, you're going to need to decide between whether you should AoE or funnel, and it's mostly going to come down to what kinds of threats are present in the pull for your team. When do you actually want to funnel, and can you like share some examples, and do you talk about these things with your team before you start?
So I've always thought about funneling sort of like a flowchart. And when you have the option to, like, whenever you go into any poll, you have to ask yourself, okay, what is most important here? Like, what's my biggest priority as a rogue? Surviving the poll or going quickly through the poll if the poll is not dangerous, right? And both of these results, interestingly, whether you want to go quickly or you want to survive, can both necessitate you doing like Black Powder pure AoE or funneling. So a good example that I see a lot of people doing this is like a big shard pull in the Halls of Atonement, right? Let's say you go into a shard pull on Fortified week, and you know it's that first, like people go left and they bloodlust and whatever. Most of the time, if you die, at least in hierarchies, you're not going to die to the shard doing its big AoE. A lot of the times, if you die, you're going to die to the wicked bolters casting on your tank because they live too long.
Mm.
And so if you ask yourself that, then it becomes much more obvious that the dangerous part of this pull is the wicked bolters, meaning that if you funnel the shard, you're not actually addressing the dangerous part of the pull. However, let's say then you have to account for like if it's bolstering or not, right? And then if it's bolstering, then you are making the pull more dangerous because then the shard's going to be too high health and it's going to get bolstered, and then that is what's going to kill your team. So a lot of times I'll see people funneling thinking that they are helping their team go quick, like just making the pull more safe or something, when it's not actually the optimal decision. And I think the more I've thought about this topic, the more I've realized that for most players, like I mean the vast majority, I'm talking like all the way up until like plus 27 keys or something, it's almost always better to black powder for your tank's survivability, because you don't actually need to go quicker through the key, or you're not doing the pulls with the level of complexity where it necessitates you funneling one specific mob. But there is some examples of when it would be good to funnel. For example, if you think about in Sanguine Depths, the scribes, a lot of times if you pull 3 scribes on Fortified, that's almost like a death sentence, right? And especially if you're just sitting there black powdering and they're just throwing randomly on people, it's probably going to kill somebody. But if you get one of them killed, 2 of them are going to have a pretty hard time killing somebody. You have to get pretty unlucky to get killed by 2 of them. So if you find yourself in a situation where you can identify this threat and then do your best to nuke it down, that's probably going to lead to the overall success of your team.
Nice. That is awesome. Yeah, do you, like, when you're funneling something, do you usually find that like just flag and like focusing all of your auto attacks is enough prio, or are you also like swapping from black powder to eviscerate for some percentage of the time, or for like the entire pull until the threat is dead?
Most of the time I am swapping from black powder to eviscerate. And I would also say that just because you're funneling something doesn't mean that you have to stick with your choice of finisher all the way until the mob is dead.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, if you take Necrotic Wake, for example, right, and you go upstairs after the second boss, and then there's those 2 ads that spawn. There's the Gorgrind guy, which does the frontal blood thing, and then there's the Rot Spew guy, which does the spit thing, right? Well, the Gorgrind guy has a lot of health, but he's not actually really dangerous. And so I funnel that guy up until the point where his health is approximately 300,000 higher than the surrounding small jumping ads, the 3 small ads. And then I switch to black powder, because I know from the passive natural priority damage of the team that 300,000 damage difference is going to get made up. And so the pack will all die at the exact same time, which is the most time efficient. But then, and so even though I was eviscerating for the vast majority of the mob, I switched to black powder at the point in which it becomes the better decision for a finisher. And then if you go over to Rot Spew on the other side, he is extremely dangerous. Like, you don't want this guy to be alive at all. So I fully eviscerate him the whole way until he's dead, because this is the best situation for this guy. Even though technically it would be faster for me to do the exact same thing and switch to black powder, he's way more dangerous for your team than the other guy. So yeah, just like on some On the shard pull, for instance, as well, like in the Halls of Atonement, I will black powder up until the point when I can tell that the casters will die before we run out of stops for them. So let's say I black powder and I see that the casters are on around 300,000 HP, 200,000 HP, meaning they're going to live for about, maybe 10 seconds. And I see that we have 2 kicks and a Shadow Fury. Well, at that point, like, I don't need to keep black powdering them, right? Like, they're going to die before they kill somebody. So immediately, like, once I sense that the pull is safe, I switch to the optimal finisher, if that makes sense.
Got it. Yeah, that definitely makes sense. The principles for single target are as follows. Cast flag while at high combo points and follow up with a finisher. Press Symbols of Death and Shadow Dance together on cooldown. While in Shadow Dance, cast 2 Shadow Strikes and an Eviscerate. Repeat these 3 spells again, then cast 2 more Shadow Strikes. These will be the 8 globals you cast while in Shadow Dance. If you get a Weapon Master or 4-piece tier proc, skip the next Shadow Strike to avoid capping on combo points and then cast Eviscerate instead. Outside of your cooldowns is when you'll be maintaining Slice and Dice and Rupture on your target. You want 100% uptime on both of these abilities in single target, but do not spend any globals on them during Shadow Dance and Symbols. You're better off refreshing these abilities early so they're up during Dance, but if you can only refresh one, then prioritize Slice and Dice. Your damage rotation outside of CDs will be pressing Backstab to build combo points, then spending combo points on Slice and Dice, Rupture, and Eviscerate. Shadow Strike the boss from Stealth to apply Find Weakness. Flag on the boss, Shuriken Tornado, Symbols and Dance, then funnel Eviscerates into your target. Your target should be either the boss or the relic your team wants to kill. Usually you can hit the relic with 2 or 3 Eviscerates, and then it will die first to your team's passive cleave, so you can swap your focus back to the boss. Speaking of relics, like, how do you use relics in your boss openers, and then, like, in general with pulls with relics? Like, what's your job and how do you help the team?
So it depends a little bit on how dangerous the relics being alive are. So for example, and this is going to change depending on your, like, the level of key, of course, and your team's gear, I guess. But as you get into the higher level keys, it becomes extremely important to kill the relics quickly. Otherwise, you can die because they start doing a little bit of damage. Such, like, if you look at the first boss of Plaguefall, Globgrog, right? His stomp on a 31 does a lot of damage, like a lot of damage. And if you don't kill the relic before the stomp happens, you could very well have a situation where a player gets a tick from a relic, so they get ticked down to 90% health, which seems fine for most people, right? To get a stomp go off when you have 70,000 health left, but that could kill you on a high key, right? So it sort of depends on the boss as to whether or not I, like, turret down a relic and just send it until it's dead. But in AoE packs, most of the time, I will eviscerate the relic until it dies. But on bosses sometimes, if there is no imminent threat, I will put like 2 or 3 eviscerates into the relic so that its health is offset enough that if you just do even cleave, that one will inevitably die first. And then I'll switch back to the boss and use a few finishers on the boss for, like, good funnel, if that makes sense.
Nice. Yeah,
because, like, at a certain point, technically, if you kill the relic off, you have, like, wasted damage in a sense. Because that relic would have died anyways to, like, Rain of Fire or something.
Right. For single target encounters, aim to get into a rhythm of casting Flag, Symbols, and then 2 Shadow Dances. Then the next time Symbols is ready, cast it with 1 Shadow Dance. You will alternate between these 2 types of windows. The main reason for doing this is because when you have Flag, you have a persistent verse buff after the Flag window ends, and so the second Shadow Dance will enable you to take advantage of that extra verse to do more damage with your second Shadow Dance. You may hold Symbols for up to 10 seconds to line up with Flag to achieve this. If Flag is ready and Symbols isn't, then you should hold Flag until your next Symbols window. I know, like, the conventional wisdom is to hold Symbols for up to, like, 10 seconds if a flag is about to come off cooldown. Do you do this, or and I guess like conversely, if you have flag but symbols is like 20 seconds away, will you just send flag, or do you wait and try to stack with symbols?
Anytime in which it's kind of a tough one because like for me it really depends on the length of the pull, not so much like so for example, let's say a pull is going to take 40 seconds, right? And you go into it and you flag. Well, your flag is probably on like a 40-second cooldown, right? So if your symbols comes off CD at 30 seconds and your flag is 10 seconds away, if you just followed that like rule list, you should be holding your symbols for the flag. But if you're not going to get another flag on the pack, then you would be just wasting a symbols usage, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of times, like if it's like pure single target or something like that, where it's like very obvious that I'm going to get another flag, like I'll generally follow a lot of these rules. But if it's things like, for example, you're supposed to use Shuriken Tornado on single target, right? But like let's say you're in Miss and you're doing the dragon, and the dragon has 200,000 health left. If it's me personally, like I'm probably not going to tornado there if I know that I'm immediately going to go into like an 8-pack where we pull through the wall in the next room with my like I wouldn't use the tornado on the dragon, right? So sometimes I kind of follow my own rules, but generally I follow like the APL, so to speak, or the correct way to play.
Outside of dance windows, you will use Shuriken Storm to build combo points and Eviscerate on 2 targets and Black Powder on 3. You can maintain Rupture on 3 targets if they will live for the entire duration, and you should aim to do this outside of your dance windows. While in Shadow Dance, you will Shadow Strike on up to 3 targets if you have 2-piece tier, and then continue to finish with Eviscerate on 2 targets and Black Powder on 3. If you don't have 2-piece tier yet, then 3 targets is where you'll start to use your Shuriken Storm to build combo points, even while in Shadow Dance. At all target counts, we want to be casting Flag, Shuriken Tornado, and Symbols as often as possible. Again, we'll be synchronizing our cast with Symbols of Death, and also casting at least one Shadow Dance with every Symbols. Getting these abilities on cooldown as often as possible, and getting full value out of them is one of the best ways that you can improve your DPS.
There are some sets of cooldowns which typically go together. For example, like you have basically 2 symbols per 1 tornado, right? Because you symbols in tornado at 0 seconds or whatever, and then you symbols by itself at 30 seconds, and then you symbols tornado again at 1 minute, and so on. But for things like flag, for me personally, if let's say I go into a pool and I get lucky, and so I get like a ton of CER with my obedience, and then my flagellation is like a 40-second cooldown, but my tornado's 1 minute, right? I'm not gonna sit on that flag for 20 seconds just to sync it back up with the tornado. And I think that like when I watch a lot of players, especially players that are like anywhere between like the 15 to 25 range, I see them sitting on not even just with Rogue, by the way, like with every single class, they're just sitting on their cooldowns too much, you know. And I think for me, one thing that really helped was associating a certain amount of health with the like approximate time to kill. So for example, if I see a mob, right, with 800,000 or 900,000 HP, then I know that it's a good usage of my flag and it's not going to be wasted. And if I see a mob with like 400,000 HP, then I know that I'm probably going to waste some of the flag. But from that, you can take into account like, okay, what's the travel time to the next pack, right? Like if you're at the end of a boss in Ardenweald, like on Dealer's Iexa, and the boss has maybe 5 seconds of damage left, well, you should flag anyways because it's going to be a 1 minute walk to leave, right? To get out. So yeah, but in general, I would just be sending my cooldowns on cooldown. The level at which where you actually need to hold damage for like certain pulls or like not cooldown to like desync things or something, that usually comes about at a pretty high key level, and it's not very often that happens.
God, that makes sense. Yeah, like on like Second boss, Sanguine Depths, I'll often find myself holding damage for the ad because like I can just turn on damage at any time. And usually they sync up pretty well with like every symbols window. I'm guessing you notice like situations like that. You decide to hold damage when you know that's coming.
Yeah, that's actually like a really good example. Any time where you know that there could be sort of like this threat that needs to be dealt with, is especially if you don't know the output of your team, or if it feels like a fight has gone on for quite a while, and like if this is the last, let's say that boss in Sanguine Depths is on like 700,000 health. That means you only need to make it through one more ad, right? It would be really, really sad for you to like send your cooldowns on the boss and then not have enough damage for the ad and have a full team wipe.
Yeah.
You could have the boss take like 5 seconds longer, and you easily kill the ad, and everything is really safe, right? So yeah, that's a great example.
Your kick is one of your most important control abilities. If you're going to have one macro, it should be a focus kick macro. This will let you target something other than what you want to interrupt, while still being able to land your interrupt. It may also be useful to have a focus shadow step macro to quickly get to your focus target. Both shadow step and kick are off the GCD, so you can move and kick at a moment's notice. Do you use like any macros for these jobs? Like I've seen you do focus kick. I think maybe focus blind as well. Do you have any other macros that are helpful?
I use focus almost every CC that you could. So I use focus, kidney shot, kick, cheap shot, blind, sap, gouge. Like you think of it, I probably have it. Yeah. And the way I do it is I just do a modifier, which means that let's say I have kidney shot assigned to S. If I press Shift S, it will kidney shot my focus, right? Mm-hmm. And I do that for all my spells. So like my blind on my main guy is Q. And if I press Shift Q, then it blinds my focus. Or my cheap shot is 2. So if I press Shift 2, then it cheap shots my focus, and so on. I do that for like pretty much every single, even Shiv I use that for, and all kinds of stuff.
Kidney shot is an incredibly powerful ability. It's one of the longest single target stuns in the game, and it's on a very short cooldown. You use this to delay casts, to desync archer type mobs that deal random damage to your team.
I find a lot of times when I'm doing hierarchies, like a lot of my stuns are kind of like if I see, let's say I see 2 scribes like perfectly synced up casting, throw research at one DPS player that has no defensive at the same time, then I will like spur of the moment stun it to desync the cast of the throw research so that they don't get one shot. Or if I see 2 bolters in Halls of Atonement that have their wicked bolts lined up on the tank at the exact same time, so that it could possibly like one shot the tank, I'll just out of the blue cheap shot it to like prevent that from happening. But yeah, that's kind of the way that we approach CC.
Rogues have some of the strongest defensive abilities in the game. Cloak of Shadows makes you immune to tons of things. For example, the third boss in Sanguine Depths when it casts its Rite of Supremacy, or the Puke in Necrotic Wake. Evasion also lets you immune tons of things. For example, the Rush on the first boss of Sanguine Depths, or the circle attacks in the Theater of Pain's Avwing from the mini-bosses.
Yeah, one unexpected use case for evasion is on the first boss of Necrotic Wake, when he does the like Plague Belch at you, the big spit, and it hits for a lot. It seems like it would be magic damage, and you can evasion it and cloak it. But the weird thing is, if you evasion it, you have 100% chance to make it, like, to do no damage, to dodge the attack. But if you cloak it, you don't have a 100% chance to dodge the attack. It's really, really weird.
Oh, that is weird.
And it actually happened to me in the last Great Push. It was kind of this cascading thing. A pull was taking too long, so I re-tricksed to make sure that the mobs were on the tank. And so then I didn't have tricks on pull for a big pull with the first boss. And so then when I speared, I got aggro of the first boss. So then I had to like split second evasion the boss's auto attack because it surprised me. And then I vanished, and then I didn't have evasion, and then I went to go cloak a spit, and it hit me and procced my cheat. And I was like I was like super surprised, because that was like the first time that it had happened in a long time, since like season 1. But yeah, you don't have a 100% chance. One thing I do a lot in keys that I don't see a lot of people doing is kind of looking for these sort of like 180 sort of turn yourself really quick evasion plays. And a lot of the time it's probably down to awareness, or that you probably weren't even aware of the fact that there was a mechanic coming towards you. But there are things like, what are some good ones? Like the throw flesh in Necrotic Wake, those mobs that throw flesh, or the scribes in Sanguine Depths. You know, if you're on like 60% health and you have evasion available, and there's nothing coming up where you would need evasion, and you see that a thing is like, you know, doing throw research on you, and this is going to hit you down to 20%. It might even kill you if the key's high enough, and it's going to freak your healer out, and everyone's going to be, you know, it's a really big help to the team to just evasion. Make sure you like turn your camera so you're facing the mob, and then dodge the throw thing so that your healer has time to top you off. And I see a lot of rogues that they don't really do this. Some other really good ones are like in Theater of Pain. There's a ton of really good evasions. You can evasion the chop from the butcher, which is a pretty fast cast, but it hits for a lot, and it's really, really good to evasion. There's the Arbalist that does the Jagged Quarrel, really, really good to evasion. You can even evasion one of the mini bosses' whirlwinds. Actually, 2 of the mini bosses' whirlwinds. So there's a lot of really good stuff. I would say for the most part, like one of the hard parts about becoming a good rogue is making sure that you're putting those defensives on cooldown throughout the dungeon in such a way that it min-maxes the uptime that the rest of your team has, and sort of brings peace of mind. Like if you are using cloak and evasion on cooldown, maybe 20 times each per dungeon, that's going to be a lot of damage mitigated, and that means way less globals from your healer to have to top you back off, which means that the healer is going to be doing more damage, which means, you know, the team's not going to be looking at the raid frames, you're not going to be proccing cheat death as often, the pulls are going to go a lot smoother. So I do see like a lot of people, like a really good example is on the first boss in Spires of Ascension. When the first boss in Spires, he puts out this magic dot on 2 players, right? And it doesn't really hit for a lot, right? It doesn't do that much. It might hit you for like 20k damage over the duration of the dot. But if you have nothing to cloak, right, you should just cloak that instantly, and then the healer can dispel the other player, and then there's 0 damage going out whatsoever on the team at all. So it's like kind of peace of mind that it brings a lot of times, where you can look for that.
I like that idea of like, yeah, trying to use your utility not just to like help yourself, but also help your team, like thinking about what's your healer worried about, what's your tank worried about, things like that. I really like that idea. Actually, one thing that really confused me when I was learning Rogue is I was in Theater of Pain and kind of limit testing, and I evasion the circle attacks from the mini bosses in the Zav wing, and it works. And I'm like, oh, this is great. And then we get to Zav and he does the circle attack, so I go to evasion and it one-shots me.
yeah, there's some annoying stuff like that that you think you should be able to, and then you can't.
Yeah,
I remember I learned the hard way with Sludge Fist in Castle Nathria. I tried to evasion the circle slam that goes around Sludge Fist, and then I died, and like I got hit by the smash, and then my chain snapped, and my partner died, and everyone was like, "What the? Like, what are you doing?" That was good.
Yep. So I mean, sometimes you, like, if it's not in the spreadsheet, right? Then like, how can you know? You gotta be the one to add it to the sheet, right?
Yep.
Feint is an absolutely busted damage reduction cooldown. It's great for bosses like the last boss in Spires or the 3rd boss in Sanguine Depths. It has a very short cooldown and doesn't cost very much energy with the Conduit. However, it also has a very short duration, so make sure that you're delaying it as long as possible and making sure to overlap the duration with as much of the damage window as you can. Crimson Vial is a decent healing ability on a short cooldown. Use it to relieve a bit of pressure from your healer. Cheat Death is a busted talent. Use it to help cover up mistakes, or use tactically for uptime or to deal with some mechanics. When in doubt, refer to the spreadsheet. It's comprehensive and generally correct. You can look at all of the mobs and bosses in all of the Shadowlands dungeons here, and I'll include a link to this in the video description. Other useful utility includes Shiv, which will remove one enrage effect. This will enable some dangerous pulls, like pulling the Bloodhorn onto the first boss of Theater of Pain, for instance. We also have different non-lethal poisons to choose from, namely Mind-Numbing Poison, which lowers the target's attack speed, and Crippling Poison, which lowers their movement speed. Generally, we'll want to default to Mind-Numbing Poison, since the passive DR for the tank is very welcome. However, there are some situations like in Ardenweald in the other side where you might expect your tank to need to kite some of the birds when they get to high beak stacks, so swapping to Crippling Poison there can be helpful. And of course we bring Shroud, which will enable your team to do skips when Woe is unavailable, or when you want to use a DPS pod instead of invis podding. Track your cooldowns. Either put them in a clear spot on your action bars or install and set up a weak aura suite. Tracking Symbols, Shadow Dance, and Flag is critical. For maintenance abilities, you want to track Slice and Dice on yourself and Rupture on enemy nameplates. A kick tracker is really helpful. Omni CD is a great option. There's also a really nice weak aura on Waggo. This can help you make decisions about when you should be using your kick or helping your team coordinate their kicks. A boss timer add-on like Big Wigs or Deadly Boss mods can be useful to help plan your CDs. You don't want to start your CD window if a mechanic is about to start that will prevent you from getting full value. So keep an eye on your boss timers when your cooldowns are coming up, and make sure that you're getting full value out of them. What about holding symbols? Like, do you look at like boss timers or anything like that when you're trying to decide like if you should send it now or if there's going to be a better opportunity in the near future?
Yeah, so this comes up in Raid quite a bit. Like one example that's top of mind is on Jailer progress. Like, for example, in P1, if you see that there's a bomb coming up and you didn't get a bomb last set, so there's a high probability you get a bomb this set, and there's 1 second away from the bomb timer and your symbols will just come off cooldown. It's a pretty bad decision to just like send your symbols and then pray that you don't get a bomb, right? When you could just hold the symbols for 1 second and then use it, right? Or another, for M+, specifically, like if you think about in Theater of Pain, like Koltarok, if you know that the draw hands, the draw soul or whatever it is coming up, right? Mm-hmm. And you know you're gonna have to like leave the boss, and then after that you're gonna get a 60% damage buff. It would be like a pretty bad decision, right? To like use your symbols and then waste the whole symbol standing in the hands, and then get the damage buff and have no symbols to use. Yeah. So there are some times where it's a good idea to hold it, but I would just caution players from thinking about holding their symbols too much, because that sort of gets in the mentality where that leads to people holding CDs in general too much, I think.
When we were wrapping up our call, I asked JPC what he thinks we should focus on to improve as rogues in M+, or as players in general.
The way I see M+ is there are problem points in each key. And it doesn't matter about class, right? There are, like, no matter what comp you're playing in Gambit, the fish sticks are always going to be a problem, right? And this exists for every single dungeon. Your number one top priority should be thinking about, how do I deal with those? And do I know the way in which my class interacts with all of those things? First, that should be the top priority. And then when you get to the point where you feel really comfortable, for example, let's say there's a pull in mists, okay? So you have the bucking rampage, the circle, you have the spear frontal, the shooter, you have a dog bite, you have 2 of the anima stingers, right? Let's say you're in a pack like that. Until you get to the point where you can like really seamlessly, you see the circle, so you insta evasion. You see there's a spear on you, so you insta shadow step the spear to get out of the way of the spear, because you don't dodge the spear with evasion. You see that you're then out of range of the fox, and the fox is going to bite the healer, so you focus blind the fox, which is about to kill the team. And you see that there's 2 stingers, which means that your healer only has 1 dispel, but they're going to put out 2 debuffs, which means that it's not sustainable to have 2 alive for very long. So you know that you insta have to flag one of the stingers and funnel it down. And until you get to the point where that's like second nature, you shouldn't worry about damage, in my opinion. Like, a lot of people are obsessed with damage when they should really be thinking about, okay, how do I use my toolkit to my team's advantage?
James, thanks for the time. Where can we find you?
You can find me streaming at twitch.tv/JPCtheman_. I got a Twitter as well. I tweet out funny memes. start some good rivalries on Twitter. That's JPC the man, and then you can catch me in the next Race to World First. Game for Liquid.
If you like this sort of content, then stay tuned. I'm going to release a lightly edited version of my call with JPC soon, so you'll get to learn even more from him about how to play Rogue and M+. Please let me know in the comments if you have any questions or ideas you want to share, or any feedback on the guide itself. Good luck out there.